Hi sewers, I'm Carrie and this is So Darn Fun. Today's project is a tale of two shirts. They look exactly the same and they're even the same size, but they're different cuts. One of them fits my client and the other one's a little too boxy. So let's go see what we might be able to do to help her out. First of all, thank you to my returning viewers, and if you haven't watched my channel before, we are a channel that focuses mainly on quality clothing alterations, pattern reviews, and useful sewing how-tos. And today, this shirt is definitely a useful sewing how-to. I've got them lined up. I've got the good shirt on top and the ill-fitting shirt on bottom, and I'm just going to show you mainly one side of this. And it looks like it's a not very noticeable difference in size, but when you wear it and think about it, it would be. And most of the problem comes in here under the arm. And what we see right here is being a generous 1/2 inch, maybe 5/8 inch. On the shirt that's too big, double that and understand that that's just all that much more circumference going around her arm that's making it feel baggy and too big. The other thing we notice here is that the sleeve is shorter on the one that fits well. So it's about 1 inch shorter here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is line this back up, of course, since I kind of messed it up. I'm going to mark it with my chalk because it's just kind of easier to get that measurement. Luckily for us, the shoulder seam right here on the neck all the way out to the tip of the shoulder, this is exactly the same on both shirts, which is good. So a lot of the measurements are exactly the same, but just the sleeve here isn't. The length of the shirt at the hem is also longer, but my client isn't worried about that. So I'm not going to do anything with hemming it. I'm just going to work on this part here. Now I don't have to take this farther down here. Now if this shirt was wider, one thing that I have to keep in mind is that if I take it in under the armpit, it's going to reduce the circumference around the bust area. So make sure that whoever's wearing the shirt has enough room in the bust that if you have to take it in here, that they can spare that circumference in the bust area. So just be mindful of that. It looks like pretty much this is just on the sleeve portion. And then when I measured the length of the sleeve here, it was about 1 inch. So I'm thinking I'm pretty safe if I take up this 1 inch. Let me double check. That to there, that's 1 inch. This isn't a complicated alteration, it's just that if you want the details to be done exactly as the original shirt, it just might take a little bit of time. Luckily also, the sleeves aren't set in, if you know what that means. It's one seam from the tip of the sleeve all the way down to the hem. So as long as we have these seams here, the armpit seams lined up, we're good to go. And you can kind of see right here, I'll try to bring this closer, how even the factory, you can see how it's a little bit uneven right here. So I really wouldn't sweat it. Wouldn't sweat it. Yeah, that's 1/2 inch. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to take it in 1/2 inch on the under sleeve, and then right about the armpit area, I'm going to taper it back out. Probably going maybe 1 inch down just to taper it back into the rest. So what's my first step? I've got all this. I think what I want to do is remove the binding first. I mean this ribbing. It's top stitched here. So we're going to just take that out, and then I'm going to pick out the serging. Okay, that top stitching's loosened. Now let's tackle this serging here, just on the binding part. I have a little video out on how to pull out serging, and I'll link it above so that you can jump to there if you want to see exactly which stitches to pick out in order to get out this serging. now that I've got just this part done, I'm going to need to take the ribbing off of the end of the sleeve. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I like to slide out the threads, which is what I'm doing. And then I got all this. So I will not bore you with all of this. I'll be back when this is done, and then we'll go to the next step. Both sides are done. I've got the ribbing taken off. And just for FYI, it took me about probably just over 10 minutes each side. So that's useful information to have if you're charging a client for doing this kind of an alteration. So now what I need to do is turn this inside out and draw that 1/2 inch under the arm that I'm going to be taking in. So how I do that is I want to make sure that this is lying nice and flat, both front and back layers. And just get a piece of chalk. And I'm going to measure from the stitching line, not from the edge, but from the stitching line up 1/2 inch all the way up to about the armpit seam, maybe just tapering it in just before that, maybe turning it into 3/8 inch right about there. And you can freehand this if you want. I'm going to take my French curve and have this help me out just a bit in figuring out which way to put it here. All right, so, and I'm just going to draw kind of dot to dot these. And even though I'm going to shorten the sleeve, I will take it out all the way to the edge first and then worry about shortening it later. So let's do the other side now. Okay, now there's a couple ways I can go about this. Obviously this is serged from the factory, and I'll probably just take it to my serger and just buzz it off. If you don't have a serger, you can use your straight stitch machine. There's always a setting that's for knits, and it kind of goes like this. When I use that stitch on knits, I lengthen it a little bit. I don't use the factory setting on my machine. So find a stitch that goes well with knits and go ahead and use that stitch. Oftentimes knits don't even really need to be finished off. If they don't run, don't worry about it. Or if you want it finished, just go and zigzag on the edge. So you would do your stretch stitch that kind of goes like this. It kind of is I'll put an image up on the top of the screen that shows you what I'm talking about, because it's not exactly a zigzag. It's kind of goes back a little bit, but then you can come back on the very edge and just zigzag over it, or just leave it plain. So I've put a pin right here at the underarm seam to make sure that those are going to be as lined up as possible. But even if they're off a little bit, I'm not going to freak out about it. Remember I showed you that the original factory underarm didn't quite line up. I like to take a blunted needle, like a tapestry needle, and just feed it under that serging, and then put the serging in there, and I hide the tail like that. Just clip off the extra, and it looks nice. Obviously we have to do both sides, so here's side number 2. So now I'm taking ribbing that I took off of the big shirt, and this is my original shirt. I'm comparing the length of it and then adding my seam allowances here, and I have already trimmed this piece off to what I need it to be. Now I realize I am not putting the trim on my shirts the way that they were originally made. When I had chalked my shirt sleeve, I could have cut it, laid it open, and then applied the binding on just flat, and then when I sewed the seam up, this would have gotten sewn. Now if that's confusing, just forget that I said it. So we're just going to do this a different way than it came from the factory, just because that's how I've already started it. So let's get to the machine. Here's my 2 bindings. I am just going to serge these, or you can straight stitch with a regular straight stitch machine. Serge this together. These don't open, by the way. I thought that they were the kind of binding that was just simply folded in half. This is super, super thick, and it doesn't open. Otherwise, I would have done it right sides together and sewn it and then folded it, but this is like some super, super thick stuff, so I have no choice than to just do it this way. So let's go back to the serger. And this is cut at an angle. You might have noticed that, because originally on the one I took off, it is at an angle. So I just kept it that way, and I'm sewing a 3/8 seam allowance. And I know when I have both of my needles on my serger, the left needle is my mark, and I know that to the edge of this right here is 3/8 inch from that left needle. So you don't have to don't look at this and say, you're not sewing it the right amount. So, oops. And once again, for the end here that's going to show of the binding, I'm going to hide that tail in here with my needle. Looks nice. Love doing that. Okay, so now I'm back here with the shirt sleeve that I'm working on. And remember how I said that this sleeve is 1 inch longer than what I need it to be. I'm going to measure 1 inch and draw a chalk line. All right, just very lightly there, because if I press too hard. Oh, did I miss that? Sorry if I did. I've got a chalk line here. You can see that. There we go. And I'm just going to cut it 1 inch from the seam, from the very edge of the seam. And here is a seam allowance that's about 3/8, 1/4 of an inch or so. And that's what I will sew my binding on with that same seam allowance. So let's cut the other sleeve. And mark it first. Don't eyeball it. You've got to mark it first. There we go. Now I need to put these right sides together. So if I can put the binding on the inside, as long as the right side is touching the right side of this. I'm going to make sure that the seams, the seam allowance, as well as hopefully I've stitched down the seam allowance on the binding the same way, but if I didn't, no big deal. Typically seam allowance is aimed toward the back when they're on the side seams, but if it gets flipped, you know, nobody's gonna know. So right. So we're not gonna stress the small things. I'm gonna half my ribbing here, and then I'm gonna half my sleeve so I can line those points up to make sure that if there's any stretching, that it's stretching the seam on the front as well as the back. I'll match the pins up. I don't need both of those pins, so I'm just going to use one pin to pin all those layers together and then pull the other pin out. There, it actually looks pretty much like it's a 1-to-1. Nothing is really stretching. I'm just going to pin them to hold them together. And I think I'm going to take this one to my serger. If you don't have a serger, just use your stretchy stitch, the one I showed you before, to go around here. And then if you wish, you can then zigzag the edges together. Let's go to the serger now. So I've got my serger set to free arm. I've taken a piece out here. So it is a free arm right now. And I need to be really careful here. I don't need to shave off any fabric, so I'm going to really try not to put this under my knife. Because really we just need the most minimal seam allowance here. I'm gonna just slide that under my needle. Don't let your pins go through on your serger. You will do some serious damage. Pull the pins out. I'm gonna hide this thread here in a minute, but this is what we've got. That looks pretty good. Okay, let me do sleeve number 2 and then let's take a look at what we've got. With the shirt sleeves done, you can now see, here's the one we just altered laying on top of the original one. You can still see my chalk line a little bit visible right there. I haven't steamed it out yet. And the sleeves are the same length, the same width. Armpit is pretty darn close, and that is more of a fit that is going to be more comfortable for this lady rather than having that wider, longer man type sleeve. So it's nice to know that today's story has a happy ending. We have 2 shirts that now are the same size and they'll fit my client great. So thank you for joining me. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you found some value in my content, and keep on sewing. See you next time.